Well, back home in Nigeria, where on this day 30 years ago, Nigeria's military president, Ibrahim Babangida, formally announced the annulment of the June 12, 1993 elections. And TVC News political correspondent Ayo Opadokun examines issues surrounding the annulment as Nigerians continue to flash back on the country's widely adjudged freest and fairest election.
On Saturday, June 12, 1993, Nigerians trooped out to vote in the presidential election that would conclude the endless transition program of the General Ibrahim Babangida regime and confine the military to the barracks. The presidential poll was contested between the two political parties in the country at the time, the Social Democratic Party SDP and the National Republican Convention NRC. The election is considered as the freest and fairest in Nigeria's political history. Chief Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola, a wealthy businessman, was the candidate of the SDP who enjoyed massive support, cutting across ethnic and religious lines in the country. He was widely expected to win the election against his opponent Alhaji Bashir Uthman Tofa of the NRC. After conclusion of voting, Abiola was coasting home to victory after winning majority of states across the country, including Kano, the home state of his opponent Tofa. On Wednesday, June 23, 1993, before announcement of the final results, the then military ruler, General Babangida, declared the election null and void, citing alleged irregularities. But most analysts insist that the primary reason for the annulment was the fear of the political elite, including General Babangida himself, that the winner of the election, Abiola, would pose a threat to their power and interests. The annulment sparked widespread protests and civil unrest across Nigeria, as many people believed their votes had been disregarded. Many Nigerians and groups were also angry that the annulment was an attempt by the military to cling to power. General Babangida's decision to annul the election was influenced by several factors, including his desire to maintain control over the political landscape, concerns about the unity of the country, and pressure within the military establishment. Some Nigerians speculate that General Babangida was also influenced by external forces, including international pressure from Western governments. Annulment of the June 12, 1993 election led to a political crisis in the country and ultimately contributed to the downfall of the Babangida regime. On the 26th of August 1993, General Babangida famously stepped aside and handed over power to a hurriedly arranged interim national government headed by the late Chief Ernest Shunekon. The interim government itself did not last, as the late General Sani Abacha toppled it and became the head of state on the 17th of November 1993. The annulment also had long-lasting consequences for Nigeria's political development and democracy. After waiting for a year for the mandate freely given to him by Nigerians to be restored, MKO Abiola declared himself the legitimate president of the country at the famous Ekpetedo Declaration in Lagos on the anniversary of the election in 1994.
Chose me as their president.
The military junta of General Sani Abacha subsequently arrested and imprisoned him for alleged treason. It was not until 1999, 6 years after the annulment, that Nigeria transitioned to civilian rule, with the election of Olusegun Obasanjo as a democratically elected president on May 29.
Do solemnly swear.
Well, for more on the June 12 annulment, let's speak to a former secretary in National Democratic Coalition, NADECO, Ayo Opadokun. Good to have you on the news at this time. So first off, let's revisit the scenario where then military head of state Ibrahim Babangida annulled what was adjudged the freest and fairest election. Now, first off, briefly tell us how this news was received.
Well, let me say that the annulment of the election was eventually pronounced by the General Ibrahim Babangida on the 24th of June. But the preceding scenarios were as follows. It was a tripartite conspiracy among General Babangida and his clique, who had contempt for the popular will of the Nigerian people. An unregistered organization called Association for Better Nigeria, led by the famous leader called Aton Zeribe, who eventually became a so-called senator in the Fourth Republic, and Justice Itai Peme, who was a counsel in the chamber of Clement Akpangbo, who coordinated the conspiracy of the judiciary. So what they did was that first, Justice Ikpeme at 9:30 p.m. gave a judgment or a ruling stopping the announcement of the election, the result of the election. And when the then National Legal Advisor of the Electoral Umpire, my brother and confidant, Buhari Bello, went to court to vacate that order, just as he was stepping out of the courts, it was announced on Radio Nigeria 4 p.m. news that the Electoral Umpire National Electoral Commission had been dissolved. So, finally, a so-called Justice Dahiru Saleh, then the presiding leader of Federal High Court in Abuja, said, based upon an action that was filed by somebody who claimed that Chief MK Abiola was unfit to be president of Nigeria because he had been involved in one unexplainable event or the other, said he was prohibiting a continuation of the announcement of the result, and so said that the election had been annulled. So Babangida now came on 24th of June to give a very provocative, long-winding, unbelievable, provocative, contemptuous rationale as to why he was annulling the freest, fairest, most credible election Nigeria ever had then. I must say here that before he did that, Nigerians ought to be reminded that at least in the last 1 year before that, for 7 years before then, Babangida and his clique, they've used Nigerians and Nigeria as guinea pigs to test the waters of how dictators can remain in office. As he was asking Nigerians to go and form political parties of their own, he already sent his
Mr. Ayo Opadokun,
cabinet men to...
Let me quickly ask you this question before we continue on the next conversation. Yes, let me quickly ask you this. Now, we understand 30 years after, a lot has changed with technology, and we have seen that in the improvement in the electoral process. But what would you say? Have we learned our lessons, or what lessons can we learn from the June 12 experience, and how best to enhance our democratic institutions?
The Nigerian army had not left us. They have not allowed Nigerian democracy to grow. They have not done anything to expand the base of democracy or democratization, or for Nigerians to learn and appreciate the features of democracy. when we forced them to go back to the barracks in 1999, they maneuvered their way because of their prolonged stay in office and ensured that one of their former commander-in-chief, military commander-in-chief, became the so-called elected president of Nigeria in the name of General Obasanjo. And you know what? The rest of that story was that he never advanced the cause of democracy. He never consolidated it. Rather, everything that he did when he was military head of state was what he did throughout his 8-year period. Remember that he sacked 3 civilian democratically elected governors of Plateau, Darie, Alamesia of Bayelsa, and Ayodele Fayose of Ekiti State. He would just, in a very extra legal way. And come to think of it, because of infraction or violence against military people, you know what he did to Odi. You know what he did to the home of the General Malu in Benue. So he never did anything to advance the cause of democracy. And come to think of it, because General Obasanjo wanted the 3rd term and he didn't get it, you know what he did with us? The resultant consequences was that another military strongman called General Muhammadu Buhari was the one who inherited the struggle of our people. And you know, he too never advanced the cause of democracy. He too did everything extra legal. So they have not allowed democracy to grow in Nigeria. Perhaps now with the fact that we now have one of our own who was in the trenches with us, with whom we suffered humiliation, oppression. We lost our sweat, we lost our blood, we lost our liberty, we lost our possession. Many of us were exiled. Some of us were incarcerated. Some people were even martyred. Now that he is in the office, we expect that he will advance the cause of democracy. Now, he ought to do one major thing that will be a lasting legacy. While he was with us, he knew that the center, a major objective of National Democratic Coalition, NADECO, was for us to return Nigeria to a federal constitutional governance and to annul the victory of Bashir Abiola, which Babangida did contemptuously. Now, fortunately for him, their party, the APC, set up the Governor El Rufai Committee as to how the party will fulfill the promise they made to Nigerians in their manifesto.
Right,
and that committee recommended that the APC should take immediate steps to return Nigeria to federal constitutional governance. So
indeed,
what we are asking to do is to take immediate measures to start working on that agenda.
All right, point taken there. Let me quickly ask you this before we let you go. What role now do you think civil society organizations and the people can play in strengthening our democracy and reducing the influence of the military?
What role?
What role do you think civil society organizations and the people can play in strengthening our democracy and, of course, reducing the influence of military?
Okay. Well, there are so many of them now who go by who give themselves the coloration of civil society. But the genuine ones among them should concentrate their attention on national rebirth, that is, a return to a federal constitutional governance upon which Nigeria secured its independence in 1960. Where we had a federal constitutional governance, there were development, the legacy which our founding fathers left for us have not been assailed by anybody. So when you have a situation where the prime minister, the head of government, is sitting together with the parliamentarians or the other parliamentarians, he just won the first among equals. Such a government will be responsible and responsive to the yearning and aspiration of the people. That is what Nigeria needs. Every other thing, I'm interested in whatever I can do, because there's a necessity for him to make life better for the ordinary man. The economic situation, the level of poverty in Nigeria is unbelievable. In a country, given the kind of godly endowment, human and material, that God had given to Nigeria, Nigerians needed not to be under this pain or economic pain and agony. I know that it's very what one can regarded in some instance a befitting leader. He had done good things when he was governor of Lagos State. Right. We expect him to be able to do better for the entire country because of the resources available to him. So he should take steps to right the wrongs, get policies that will enhance the living standard condition of our people.
All right.
Our decayed infrastructures are very unbecoming. This is not the country with human and natural resources.
All right, and that's a fine place to leave it, Mr. Ayo Opadokun. Appreciate your insights on the news at this time. Unfortunately, because of time, we cannot continue the conversation anymore, but we appreciate all you've said so far on the news at this time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.